Welcome back to the channel, everybody. How are we doing today? Now, I know that a lot of the big heavy hitters are out of the way in terms of PS4 games, with The Last of Us coming out, Ghost of Tsushima coming out, and the PS5 being just almost imminent on the horizon, but the PS4 still has a lot of life left in it. So today what I want to do is go over 10 games that you still have to look forward to on the PS4 for the rest of 2020. Let's dive in and take a look at them. Now, if you're a new viewer of the channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button down below. I do videos like this all the time, looking at PlayStation and trophy-related content, checking out PlayStation news, pulling together lists and things, so you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date. Now, today what we're doing is taking a look at 10 PS4 games that you still have to look forward to for the rest of 2020. Now, I know PS5 is just on the horizon, but there are still a ton of games left in this system's life that you should be excited about. Let's dive in and take a look at the first one. Destroy All Humans is another THQ remake from the 2005 classic of the same name. Developed by Black Forest Games, a lesser known developer whose most recent work includes Fade to Silence, which was a more quietly released adventure game that came out in 2019 to not a lot of fanfare. Destroy All Humans is set to be this developer's big break though, with some pretty decent brand recognition and a heritage of games and lore. Black Forest should have a winning formula to pull from here, providing of course that they nail all the basics associated with remastering a game. If you're unaware of what Destroy All Humans is, it's an open world mascot collectathon type game. You play as an alien from the alien race known as the Furon. Your character is named Crypto on a quest to, you kind of probably already guessed, destroy all the humans. Crypto, along with his boss Pox, are here on Earth doing research on humans in the 1950s. Yeah, there's not a lot of games set in the 1950s, right? The game is reminiscent of other games in that 2005 mascot platformer era, but specifically it takes a heavy amount of inspiration from games like Ratchet and Clank, with Destroy All Humans also featuring a massive arsenal of weapons, as well as games like Jak 2, Grand Theft Auto 3, where these sandboxes came to life. Overall, the game doesn't take itself seriously at all, and it's a lot of fun with a massive arsenal of weapons, and the game is set to be something really special coming out at the end of July. With August being a relatively empty month in terms of games, September is when we have a ton of new stuff coming. First up is Avengers. Now, Avengers is being developed by Crystal Dynamics. These are the guys that made Tomb Raider, or at least the most recent Tomb Raider games on the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. They were responsible for the newest trilogy, or I guess the first half of that trilogy of games. So they do have a lot of competence behind them. I know there's been a lot of criticism about this game, mainly around how the characters look in the game and what their appearances are, what the narrative of it is, and I guess a lot of it is because it's being compared to the Avengers film franchise, and it's kind of hard not to compare the two. I think it's unfair in a way because it is its own entity, but it's also not unfair because they are cashing in on people's knowledge of that franchise. Not a lot of people know Avengers as anything else other than the MCU. So Avengers is a third-person action game. You play as the main cast of Avengers, plus a couple of other superhero characters who they're slowly teasing out as time goes on, and you essentially have to... it's a unique story. You progress through this unique narrative of the Avengers. The description alone should be ticking all the boxes, right? On paper, this sounds great, but in practice, who knows? How do you balance the power of Thor and the Hulk with Iron Man and Captain America or Black Widow? It's just such a difficult task for the developer to do, and who knows how they're going to pull it off. The game is looking pretty exciting though. Details have been kind of scarce. They sort of pump out a ton of information, then go quiet on it. I'm really keen to see it. After the last drop of trailers and information about multiplayer and things, I'm kind of keen to check this one out, but I guess time will tell. We'll see in about a month's time whether this one is going to stand up to the hype or not. The Birdman returns shortly after Avengers with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and Pro Skater 2, two classic games in a single package. 2 decades later. For those of you who have been living under a rock for the past 20 years, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is an incredibly popular game back in the PlayStation 1 console generation, with regular releases every couple of years. And I guess in that time, skating and by proxy, Tony Hawk was at its peak. Extreme sports was just a thing back then. It wasn't just skating games that made their PS1 debut, but we also saw a massive range of extreme sports games released on that platform too. Hands up anyone who remembers Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater Remastered is being developed by Vicarious Visions. Yep, they're the guys who made the Crash Insane trilogy. who honestly did a stunning job with that game. Arguably one of my favorite games of all time. So I do have faith in these guys to do justice to this remake on a beloved PS1 classic. I do wonder though what this means for the genre, with games like this being so prominent through the late 90s and early 2000s, and then for the most part disappearing for an entire console generation. Lately we've seen 3 skateboarding games announced, almost all on top of each other, and I hope it doesn't become one of those, rhythm game fiascos again, with games just oversaturating the market. The game is set to feature the same levels, skaters, tricks, physics, and music from the originals, with some additions to all of the above to boot. The game also has a really awesome collector's edition, which includes an insane looking Birdman skate deck, and I couldn't hit pre-order quick enough on that one. One thing I am curious about is I wonder who the guest skaters are going to be in this game. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater has always featured a number of unlockable guest skaters, including Spider-Man, Shrek, Darth Maul, which obviously all fit into that early 2000s era. But who are we going to get in 2020? Given the game is Activision owned, my bet would be there's a pretty good chance that Crash or Spyro, or maybe both of them, might make it into the game as guest skaters. But I guess we'll know closer to the game's launch. Coming out in August, we have Kingdoms of Amalur Rereckoning. This is another THQ remaster, similar to Destroy All Humans, of a fantastic third-person action RPG that came out in, I think, 2012 now. The game was originally published by EA. The rights have been sold since to THQ, who have taken on the game and are now seemingly republishing it as Rereckoning. The original game was really cool, but given it came out so close to the launch of Skyrim, I think that's probably why it kind of went under a lot of people's radars. The game itself is, I guess, probably does a lot of classic RPG hack and slash type stuff right. It has a really cool art style which reminds me of Warcraft. The hack and slash elements are really fun to play. They feel very similar to, a Shadow of the Colossus or a Dragon's Dogma in terms of gameplay elements, and it has a lot of really cool RPG explorative elements as well to it. The really neat thing about this one though is that the developers recently announced that while they're releasing the main game in August, they're also planning on releasing a ton of DLC for the game post-launch as well, which we never get for remasters like this. So it's exciting to see the amount of effort being put into a game like this and the amount of care being taken to cultivate something really, really special here. Next up, we have something that you guys are probably a little bit sick of hearing of by now, but Mafia Remastered. Now, I know Mafia 2 and Mafia 3 have caught a ton of flack of late, but it does appear that 2K are putting a ton of effort into making Mafia Remastered something special. It's recently just been delayed and moved out of its August window into September, and all the trailers for the game are looking super, super promising. Given that they didn't put a ton of effort into remastering Mafia 2, I think this is where a lot of the time and effort is going into. If you're not familiar with the franchise, Mafia is a long-running third-person, I guess open-world action franchise, very similar to Grand Theft Auto, but probably a little bit more isolated, I would say. You're not encouraged to go out and do as much exploration in these games. You're more encouraged to follow the mission objectives and things like that, even though there are collectibles and things in the games too. Mafia had an awesome story when it came out on the PlayStation 2 back in the day, so I think as long as 2K managed to remaster the game and bring it up to current gen expectations in terms of gameplay, graphics, loading times, things like that, as well as also obviously voice acting and things, then they should be okay, because the narrative and everything was very, very solid. So they could be onto a winner here, but I guess time will tell, and with what they did with the previous game, who knows? But I am quietly optimistic that this game is going to be a very, very solid release for 2K later in the year. Now, long-time viewers of the channel know that I am a massive Crash Bandicoot fan, and Crash is finally back, and it's about time. Sorry. That's the name of the game. So Crash for It's About Time. The pun is there. I get it. It's good. I'm pretty excited for it. The art style has changed slightly and it has upset people. I've had actually a number of people in the comments section complaining about the title being Crash 4 as well. Honestly, I don't see the big deal. I think every game after CTR kind of went downhill for Crash, and there was some good games in there. Don't get me wrong, there was some great stuff in there too, but generally speaking, I think it was weaker than the original games, and I think that's probably why Activision have decided to go back to the drawing board with this one. Crash 4 takes place after Crash 3, as you can probably tell by the title. It's another linear mascot platformer like those original 3 games were. It's not a beat 'em up, it's not anything like that. It's just mascot platforming, and yeah, they said it's about time travel, dimensional travel, so there is potential for Crash to interact with other versions of himself, I suppose, and other universes as well. So maybe the Crash of the Titans Crash, or the Insane Trilogy Crash, or the PS1 Crash, who knows what's going to happen in this game. However, I'm excited that there's a new Crash game coming out. I'm excited about Toys for Bob making the game. I think they have a lot of potential. They did a great job with Skylanders. They did a great job with Spyro. And I think, that they have the chops to do something really cool with this. So I'm super excited. I'm super optimistic. Honestly, this is probably one of my most anticipated releases for the rest of 2020. Now, this one kind of came out of nowhere. Star Wars Rogue Squadron. It was announced, or I guess leaked, a couple of weeks before EA's press conference. And then they showed it off more extensively during its EA Play conference in June. And the game looks really, really rad. A space simulator type game. One of the most surprising things to me is that it has a full VR compatibility. So you can play through the game both in VR as well as in normal mode, which not a ton of games are doing in 2020. You might remember earlier on in the generation, Resident Evil 7 did something like this, where you could choose to play through the game however you wanted to. And I think it's really cool that EA are taking a risk on doing that. And really, honestly, I think that a space game like this would play very, very well in VR. You might remember in Star Wars Battlefront, there was like a little VR teaser thing you could play in that, where you were flying around in an X-Wing. I think it was called X-Wing missions, and it was very good in VR. So I think this is going to be doing something very similar to that in terms of gameplay, but obviously pulled out to a full experience. I also appreciate that EA aren't charging full price for this game. It does seem like it's one of those B-tier games, so it's charged at half price. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, because at the end of the day, it is still a flight game. It's not I know it is Star Wars, which is a massive IP, but it's still just a flight sim type game, or a space shooter type game, which is not everyone's cup of tea. So I think that's probably why they have priced it that way. The game is looking very solid though, but then, I don't know, based on EA's track record with Battlefront and Star Wars, yeah, take it all with a grain of salt. But yeah, the game's coming out very, very soon. So this is the first of 2 Ubisoft games coming out this year. Watch Dogs Legion. It's the long-delayed Watch Dogs game. This game was supposed to come out start of this year, the end of last year, the middle of last year. It's been delayed like 2 or 3 times now until it's finally hit this window. I'm not really sure why. There must have been some problems with this game, but this is everything you know and love about Watch Dogs. Your third-person action adventure open world game about a group of hackers called DedSec. The difference in this one compared to the previous 2 games is you don't really have a protagonist per se. You can choose a lot of different characters that you can take control of and play as. So you don't have that like dynamic character like the previous game. Well, actually, to be fair, the first game didn't have a very dynamic character either. This features a ton of different characters that you can play as to different degrees of comedy. They've been showing off the grandma character quite a bit. The game looks interesting, I would say. Watch Dogs has always had a bit of a soft spot for me. I actually really did enjoy the first game. I think it wasn't as amazing as what people were expecting, but I think it was pretty competent in terms of a third-person open-world game, and I dug it. I think the mechanics around hacking and stuff are really cool, and this game seems to be ratcheting all of that up even further, and the setting is different. We're playing in London this time around, we're not playing in the United States, and yeah, they've taken a different approach. There's not a ton of games where you play in London, and you can kind of have that sandbox adventure in London, so I think that's kind of cool. It definitely acts as a point of difference for this game. The next Ubisoft game coming out is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, your annualized Assassin's Creed release. I guess seemingly less annualized. In more recent times, these games have taken a pretty massive departure from their roots as a stealth action game to be much more of an action game, or just open world action, with less of a focus on stealth and a much greater focus on combat and exploration. And Assassin's Creed Valhalla is no exception to this. Set in the age of Norse mythology, you play as a character Eivor, a Viking raider who is leading an army of Vikings in a war against the Anglo-Saxons. The overall design of the game does feel very similar to Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Origins, taking a departure, like I said, from earlier entries in the franchise, putting you in a huge open world with lots of missions to do, side missions, collectibles, and other things to explore. If it's anything like the most recent 2 games, it's going to be a massive time sink, which is great if you're only planning on getting this one game this holiday, but if you're planning on getting any more than just one game and everything else on this list, then you're in for a world of hurt with this one. Odyssey spanned well over the 60-hour mark just to finish the game, and I personally, I am excited for a change in scenery, but I am nervous about the length of these games and how bloated they're getting. I respect Assassin's Creed though for changing the environment, the characters and everything every iteration. I think it does freshen things up each time, so if you don't enjoy one particular entry, then maybe the next one is for you. I do like the Viking and Norse mythology theming as well. I think it's something that's really touched in video games, and it did work pretty well in 2018's God of War, and I'm sure whatever Ubisoft have cooking here for Assassin's Creed Valhalla will be just as special. Now, finally on the list, and not finally because it's the least exciting, but because it's the last one to come out, we have Cyberpunk 2077. This is arguably some people's most anticipated game of this year, or of the last couple of years. Developed by CD Projekt Red, the developers behind the Witcher series, and I guess everyone's favorite, The Witcher 3, which was one of the best RPGs on the platform. Cyberpunk is a open world action RPG, I suppose, set in this future environment. You play as these augmented humans. It has a high focus on narrative, obviously, but then gameplay as well. Very similar to what The Witcher did, where it had its cinematic gameplay, but a deep lore and a deep open world with lots of stuff to do. And this appears to be doing something very similar to that. Unfortunately, this game's been delayed a number of times now, probably to get it 100% right. I know that there's probably a ton riding on this game, and my guess is that CD Projekt Red didn't want to launch it until it was absolutely perfect and exactly what they wanted. And I think given they've pushed it probably as far as they can out of its original launch window, this is gonna be the date. So guys can get excited for this one. I know there's gonna be a ton of people who are pumped for this game. I'm nervous about it coming out when all the next gen releases are coming out, for sure. I think it's probably gonna stand on its own in terms of quality, but there's so many games coming out at that time. Hitting that November window, I would say firmly puts it in next gen launch, and that to me, it just makes me a little bit nervous. I want to be playing PS5 and PS5 games at that time. And maybe I'll be playing Cyberpunk. Who knows? I guess we'll see when the PS5's release date has finally been announced. But there you have it, everybody. That is 10 games coming for the PS4 for the back half of 2020 that you have to look forward to still. There's still a ton of awesome stuff coming, right? Like, you can't deny that we have a ton of decent games coming for the back half of this year. Fingers crossed none of them get delayed, and we can be playing them all this year. But let me know in the comment section down below which ones you're most excited for and which ones you're going to be playing. I'm very curious to find out which ones you're going to be playing, and I will see you guys all in the next video.